welcome once again to the Ismaili Centre London for our first event of 2021. My name is Zaki Manji and I'll be your host today. Despite an ongoing lockdown, we've got a really exciting lineup of events to share with you throughout this year on Ismaili TV. Now, today's event is a rather special one for me personally, a chance to interview the man I devoted 2 months of my life to in 2019 on an exhilarating leadership campaign. No, not Clifford Chance nor JP Morgan, but Jeremy Hunt, Member of Parliament for South West Surrey. First, I want to introduce you to the Ismaili Centre London, the Ismaili community in the UK, our flagship Ismaili civic initiative, and to give you some wider context on how AKDN fits into this puzzle, all under the leadership of His Highness the Aga Khan. The Ismaili Centre London is one of a number of Ismaili centres around the world. These contemporary buildings reflect the rich architectural heritage of Islam, as well as serving a functional purpose. They are places of congregational prayer for Ismaili Muslims and offer a space for dialogue and learning. This particular Ismaili Centre in London was opened in 1985 by His Highness the Aga Khan, Imam of the Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims, and the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the late Baroness Thatcher. The Ismaili community has had an ever-growing presence in the UK since the first arrivals over half a century ago. And during that period of time, we have continued to give back to the communities and societies in which we have settled. Ismaili Civic was launched in the UK last March and is the global umbrella under which Ismailis endeavour to engage and unite the community around a mission to serve humanity by improving the quality of life in the societies in which we live. This international endeavour reflects the community's ethic of civic engagement and good citizenship, whilst also exemplifying Islam's core values of service, peace, compassion, and care for the vulnerable. His Highness the Aga Khan is the spiritual leader and 49th hereditary Imam of the Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims and traces his direct lineage back to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His Highness is also the founding chairman of the Aga Khan Development Network, or AKDN, which is made up of private, international, and non-denominational agencies. These agencies work synergistically to improve the welfare and prospects of people in the developing world, and particularly across Asia and Africa. I am sure that during his time as Foreign Secretary, our guest today will have engaged with AKDN, given the strong relationship between the network and the British government. It is a real pleasure for us to have the opportunity to sit down with Jeremy Hunt today, a man who, up until his resignation in 2019, was the longest serving cabinet minister from the beginning of the first Cameron government. He has held a number of positions within government, beginning his cabinet career as Secretary of State for Culture, and also as the minister responsible for the delivery of the 2012 Olympics, during which a number of Ismaili volunteers played a part as games makers. He then went on to be the longest ever serving Health Secretary and oversaw the integration of social care into the department's key priorities. Finally, in 2018, Theresa May appointed him Foreign Secretary, a position he held until the end of the well-documented Conservative leadership election in the summer of 2019, when I had the opportunity to closely work with him on his campaign. Since then, Jeremy has been recast as a backbencher and as chair of the influential Health and Social Care Select Committee, holding the government to account. Before his entry into politics, Jeremy was an entrepreneur and a successful businessman. Now, his extensive experience both in and outside of government means that he's eminently qualified to give us an insight into foreign relations, health, the future of the country and economy post-Brexit and COVID, the environment, and everything in between. So let's hear what he had to say when I spoke to him. Jeremy, it's so lovely to see you again, despite these slightly strange circumstances, and welcome to the Ismaili Centre virtually. Hopefully, when things have eased up with lockdown and the pandemic, we can host you here again in person. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today and explore sort of your experiences both within cabinet and more widely within politics.
Well, Zaki, it's lovely to be here, and I'm sorry I can't be at the Ismaili Centre in person, but it looks wonderful from what I can see down the camera. So, absolute pleasure to be with you.
Brilliant. So, look, Jeremy, I'll launch into the first question, which I think is a fairly sort of all-encompassing one. Everyone said that 2021 is going to be the Great Reset for a number of things, for health, for societies, for culture, for sort of global inequality, and all of these different conversations have been going on over the past years. What for you is the Great Reset, and why do you sort of think it's important?
Well, I think there are really two big resets that we need, and they both relate to the pandemic in different ways. The first is that if you think back to when the NHS was founded in 1948, we were absolutely broke as a country after the Second World War. We had huge debts, and we were knackered. And yet the Labour government then, with strong support from the Conservatives, went ahead and set up the NHS. And it was a very visionary thing to do. And I think we have built the most accessible healthcare system in the world. Survey after survey bears that out, but not always the highest quality healthcare service in the world. And that's what doctors and nurses passionately want to deliver. So I hope this is a very big reset moment for the NHS, and we turn it into another 1948 moment where we say that we're going to tackle the fact that we have worse cancer survival rates than France and Germany, that we have double the amount of baby deaths that Sweden has. We're going to sort out the problems in the social care system. And that's the big reset moment, because we have realised over the last year just how much the NHS and social care system matter to us. And therefore, I think there will be enormous public support if the government rose to that moment. But then, as a former Foreign Secretary, I look at something else, and that is that in this decade, for the first time in our lifetimes, the largest economy in the world will not be a democracy. China is due to overtake the United States in 2028. And I think that if we want to protect open societies and democratic values, we've got to make sure our democracy works well at home. And that means building a society where everyone feels they have a voice, everyone feels they have a chance to reach for the stars, everyone feels they matter. And what the pandemic has shown is that we are a very unequal society, not least by the very high numbers of people from minority ethnic backgrounds who've died, much higher proportion than the white majority. And a lot of that is due to long-standing health inequalities, the fact that they live in more deprived communities, more crowded housing, less likely to access health services when they need them. So I hope it'll be a reset where we bring the whole country together.
Great. I think that positive vision is hopefully shared by everyone. I think you've addressed it very succinctly, and you talk about the NHS and the work of the health and social care sector. Now, you were the health secretary who integrated social care into your department by name, sort of bringing it to the fore. And on that, I wanted to sort of ask about the role that faith communities and civil society groups and individuals who've all played their part during the past year to support the communities around them. In fact, we launched Ismaili Civic in the UK, the aim of which is to support the communities around us and provide support to those most vulnerable in society. And given your experience and what you've seen over the past year, but also when you were health secretary, are there any lessons or advice that civil society and community groups can take from this pandemic, and how actually these groups can prepare themselves for the future?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, if you think about people from different ethnic backgrounds in the UK, well, actually, I think we have pretty good inter-community relations. I think we're a very open society, and I think we have a pretty good track record. But we can learn from each other. And I would say that one of the things, if we're going to make this a 1948 moment for the health and social care system, is that we need the support of community groups to really make sure that people from some of the more deprived minority ethnic backgrounds take control and responsibility for their own healthcare, come forward and get that coronavirus vaccine, whatever some of the scare stories are that people read about on the internet, that we tackle some of the obesity and diabetes issues that we have in the Asian community in particular. Many of these issues are best tackled through groups, community groups that people trust, sometimes not the authorities. But let me say, as someone who's white British, that there's something that we can learn from those communities, which is the very strong family links that you often have. And as we look at the social care system, what we're really trying to do is to create a social care system where every single older person is treated with dignity and respect. And that means having strong family links. That is, for most older people, it is infinitely preferable to be living with their family in a multi-generational household than to be going into a care home. So I think we've all got to think about the roles and responsibilities of families. And that's something that perhaps we can learn a very great deal from some of the very close family bonds that exist in our ethnic minority communities.
Absolutely, and one of our flagship offerings as Ismaili Civic for the last year has been a check-in and chat service where people, especially older people, but more generally vulnerable individuals, have been left alone, physically alone in their houses over the past year, and so we've seen the power that even a simple conversation, a Zoom call, a letter, Smile Through Art was one of the projects we had where 800 plus pieces of artwork were sent to care homes around the country, made by members of the UK Ismaili community, and it's all about, I guess, putting a smile on people's faces and reminding them that they're not alone. Mental health, that sort of naturally leads on from that answer. The mental health challenges that we've seen across the world, but especially here in the UK, where the ebb and flow of lockdown has been incredibly difficult on individuals, families, groups. It's been massively compounded. How should we address those mental health challenges? You talk about family, but obviously not everyone's got access to family in a ready sense. How do we make sure that these people are just as well looked after, if not more so?
Well, two things, Zaki, on that really. First of all, any psychiatrist will tell you that some really terrible mental health conditions, whether it's bipolar disorder or acute depression or anxiety, are often triggered by a dramatic change in life circumstances. And of course, what the pandemic has done is changed life circumstances for many people. People have found that they've lost a loved one who they haven't been able to see for months and months because of the social distancing rules. People have lost their jobs. People have not been able to socialize in a normal way, and that's created some real pressures inside families. So one responsibility for the NHS and for the government is to make sure that we find out who needs specialist mental health care as a result of this change in the pandemic. But I think there's something else that we can all do, which is learn about mental and emotional resilience. I always think at school we're pretty good at teaching people about physical health, diet, exercise. Those are kind of lessons that are drummed into most children. Not that they always listen, but they are drummed into most children. But we're less good at teaching people about how to stay mentally and emotionally resilient through the life crises that we all have. We all have bereavements. Many people have divorces. Most people have relationships that don't work out in one way or another at some stage in their life, losing your job, all these things. And, the evidence, I'm not a psychiatrist, so, I'm not an expert, but from what I've seen, the evidence is very clear that having strong relationships in your life helps a lot. Good friends, strong family, being physically energetic and out and about makes a difference. Charitable work, which of course the Ismaili community know all about, is curiously a very good predictor of mental resilience. And learning new things in your life is also something that makes a big difference. So learning about how to stay resilient is a bigger societal change that I hope we now really start to embrace.
Great. Lifelong learning is something that His Highness the Aga Khan, as the spiritual leader of the Ismaili community, has always spoken about. And I think that's incredibly important, that we're, just because we reach a certain stage in life doesn't mean we stop learning or anything like that. And as you said, the community itself is deeply has sort of voluntary work and charity work deeply sort of within its sort of fabric. So it's something of real pride for us.
Well, His Holiness has been an enormous benefactor to charitable causes across the world. Yeah. But I think that one of the things that he would probably agree is that we've had a very rigid delineation in the way we set up society across the world, which says basically full-time education until university, then full-time work, and then full-time retirement. Whereas actually what you really want is for that learning to be carrying on through your whole life, so that we're always growing. Yeah,
no, exactly. So Jeremy, you mentioned earlier about the change in the balance of the international rule-based order. Now, this was something that I remember specifically mentioned in a speech back in October 2018, when you were Foreign Secretary, and you spoke of the risk to the traditional international-based the rules-based international order that's existed essentially since 1945. There are global partnerships that have come from this, like Gavi, more recently COVAX and others. But the threats of misinformation, disinformation, and also just other threats from state actors and non-state actors alike put these organisations and partnerships at risk. And how do you make sure that they're protected and able to continue the incredibly important work in the face of these threats?
Well, we need to restore our moral vision, and I think the change of US president can be immensely beneficial. I mean, if I take an example, if you think about one of the most controversial US presidents in recent years prior to Donald Trump, George W. Bush, who started the Iraq War with Tony Blair. George Bush Jr. is revered in Africa because he set up the PEPFAR fund, which basically made antiretroviral drugs free to everyone in Africa. And I've seen with my own eyes what a transformation that has been to orphans born with HIV in African countries. And when America and Britain and leading democracies do things like that, then people sort of understand that we are a force for good in the world. And we need to restore that sense of a bigger global purpose to our diplomacy than just looking after our own narrow national interest, although that is an important job for any government. And I think we need to get much closer to countries who share those values. The other democracies in Europe, in Asia, North America, South America. And we need to make common cause for a new global order where there won't be a dominant superpower as America has been. But if we pull together, we can shape it so that it remains safe for open societies and democracies.
Absolutely. I think everyone would agree with that. And it does also raise the issue of issues like, well, the big one is Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion and climate change. Climate change is obviously a massive differentiator between the Western world and the more developing world, and the balance or the imbalance in this world order means that climate change is going to be a big issue to overcome as we try and forge this new world order. How can we as the UK, and how should this issue be addressed by leaders, whilst also respecting the fact that countries like the UK, the USA have had hundreds of years to get to a certain point, and now we're effectively demanding that others skip that opportunity and sort of just go straight to sort of climate friendly ways of living?
Well, this is why we have to work very closely and be very reasonable about the fact that countries that don't have our standard of living will want to develop and grow to our standard of living, but we have to help them do so in a way that is environmentally friendly. But I think we can do that because it's so patently in China's interest and Africa's interest to prevent climate catastrophe. I think we can start to see those changes. So I don't think we'll see any resistance to electric cars in Africa, because they want to get rid of the pollution and the fumes from the centre of Nairobi and Joburg just as much as we do in London. So I think we need to make common cause. And I think climate change is an issue, funnily enough, which can unite the democracies of the world and actually those countries that don't necessarily share Western democratic values, because I think that China's committed to net zero, I think by 2060, and Russia might be a slightly harder nut to crack with its energy industry and its dependence on revenue from natural gas. But I think this is something where we can really bring the whole world together on.
Great. Now, Jeremy, the Ismaili community has a lot of entrepreneurs within its midst, and you, I remember hearing you talk about yourself as an entrepreneur a lot during the summer of 2019, during the leadership campaign. What would you say, political career aside, what advice would you give entrepreneurs in this day and age on how they can succeed and what they should do?
Well, I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and I never did an MBA, but I always, all the lessons I learned from business, a lot of them were from the Japanese approach to business. And I always think the key in business is to have a long enough horizon that you really do something transformational and exciting in your business, but not so long that actually you're always thinking about what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years' time and you don't actually change anything today. So I always think 2 to 3 years is a good time horizon for a small business. You know, what's going to be radically different about our business in 2 to 3 years' time compared to now? What's the giant leap that we can make? And then the other bit of advice I always think is that, you know, concentrate on having a fantastic product or a fantastic service, and the profits will look after themselves. But if you make profit the primary motive and the driving motive, then you'll end up potentially compromising in a way your customers don't like. So that's always been my approach to business. It's a little bit more long term than is sometimes typical, but I think it's also ethical as well. You can't motivate your staff by getting excited about the profits that you yourself are going to make as a business owner. They're in your company because they want to be proud of the product or service that you're supplying. And so that's what I think you always have to aim for.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I remember doing some research back in the previous life, looking at the future of the world of work, and it certainly seems that the millennial, the Generation Z cohort want careers and want jobs that are morally above board and fit in with their ethical frameworks. So I think that's something really important. And we're in the last year we've had a lockdown, but actually I'm sure there have been many people who have lost other forms of employment, who've been fizzing away with their minds racing on how they can sort of seize the moment in moving forward. Jeremy, you've had a very well documented political career since you won South West Surrey in 2005, and people, especially in perhaps the BAME minority communities in the UK, aren't as attracted by going into life in politics because it's seen as very bitter. It can be very difficult on personal lives, on family lives, and all these sorts of things. But if we want to have a political system and a political class that's truly representative of the UK, we need to encourage people into politics more and more, into government, into diplomacy. What's the advice that you would give to those people, young and old?
What I would say is that politics is the most noble profession of all, even if politicians aren't the noblest people of all, because it's concerned with the future of our country and the future of our society and the future of the world. And it's incredibly important that we have really good representation from the Ismaili community, but actually from all our communities, because people need to look at Parliament and think that it reflects back the country that they live in. I think it's really important. The advice I would give is it's fascinating and it's fun, but it's a roller coaster and there are lots of ups and downs. And if you can find a way to have some financial security before you go into politics, then you'll be less exposed if you're, for example, in a marginal seat and you don't hold on to it after a general election. So I'm a great believer in doing something else first, perhaps an entrepreneur, perhaps becoming a lawyer, but something first that can give you some kind of security that then becomes a base for a successful parliamentary career.
Great. And Jeremy, I know you have to run very shortly, so I'm going to finish off with one final question, which is very simple. What are you excited about in 2021?
Well, I think 2021 is a year when there is a big public consensus that we can't carry on the way we've always carried on. And this can be a big moment of change. And I feel with Brexit, with the changes that I'm campaigning for in our health and social care system, with a new American president, this really can be one of those big reset years. But what we have to make sure is that we don't just talk about it, we actually do it. And I certainly will be pressing for that in Parliament.
Brilliant. Jeremy, thank you so much. It's been lovely to catch up and to have you speak to, well, we're going to have a domestic audience, but also a global audience on Ismaili TV watching this. Please do come visit us at the Ismaili Centre in person when it's possible. But until then, keep safe and well, and good luck with everything this year.
Likewise, Zaki. Pleasure to talk to you as ever.
Thanks so much.
All the best.
Bye.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.
I'm sure you will all agree that that was a fascinating insight into Jeremy's experience, thoughts, and hopes for the future. Certainly, there is a lot to reflect on too. We are enormously grateful to him for slotting us into his incredibly busy schedule and hope to welcome him to the Ismaili Centre in person soon enough. Now, of course, today's event would not have been possible without our volunteers, who are the exemplars of our shared community values. We express our heartfelt thanks to them all. Thank you to you too, our virtual and global audience, for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you back to the Ismaili Centre London in the not too distant future for the rest of our exciting events lineup. Until then, keep safe and well.